Life right now is actually incredible. Genuinely one of the best times in human history to be alive and trying to build something. I know most of what we talk about here is the struggle, the decline, the stuff working against you. All of that is real and I stand by every word of it. But there is a flip side to it that almost nobody is saying out loud, and I think it might be the single most important thing I say on this channel all year. It has never been easier to become great. Not because the world got easier, the world is genuinely harder in a lot of the ways we have covered, housing, wages, the whole picture, but something else has happened at the exact same time, and it is the thing that makes all of this actually good news if you are paying attention. The competition has collapsed. Not the economic competition, the human competition. The number of people around you who are actually trying, actually building, actually pushing themselves toward anything has dropped so low that the bar for standing out is now sitting somewhere around the ankles. A study came out recently comparing the physical strength of men aged 20 to 34 today against men the same age in the 1980s. Same tests, grip strength, pinch strength, real measurable numbers. The result was a 22% decline in one generation. That is not a vibe or a cultural observation. That is a measured physical fact about the hands of young men right now compared to their fathers at the same age. 22% weaker in 40 years in a species that had not physically weakened in any comparable way across the previous 10,000. Sit with that for a second because it tells you something enormous about where the bar actually sits today. Now go back and look at what being a young man used to actually require, because the contrast is the whole point of this video. The English longbowmen who won at Agincourt in 1415 began training as boys, 10 years of daily practice before they were considered proficient. The draw weight of a warbow was somewhere between 100 and 180 pounds, pulled thousands of times across a career, to the point where archaeologists digging up their skeletons centuries later can identify them by name from the specific bone deformities in their shoulders and spines. Enlarged left arms, twisted vertebrae, permanently altered skeletons from repetition alone. They marched to France carrying that weapon plus their own kit, stood in a muddy field outnumbered 5-1 by armoured French knights, and won. The PALS battalions of the First World War were made of teenagers, boys who lied about their age to enlist alongside their friends from the same street, the same factory, the same football team, because that was the promise: you get to serve with the men you grew up with. On the first day of the Somme, tens of thousands of those boys walked directly into machine gun fire carrying 66 pounds of equipment at a steady pace because running was against orders. 19,000 British dead before lunch. That was considered at the time simply what the moment required of them, and they did it. The Vikings crossed open ocean in wooden boats with no compass, no engine, nothing but the stars and their own reading of the water, at 17 or 18 years old, because that was the expected passage into manhood in their world. Roman legionaries marched 20 miles a day in full armour carrying 60 pounds of kit, and at the end of that march, before they were permitted to eat or sleep, they dug and built a fully fortified camp from scratch every single night for years, sometimes decades, across multiple continents. None of that was exceptional for its time. That was baseline. That was what a normal, unremarkable young man was expected to be physically and mentally capable of, as a matter of course, in every single generation before this one. Now look at what is actually being asked of you. Not war, not the open ocean, not 20 miles in full kit. You are being asked most days to read for 20 minutes, train 3 times a week, show up on time, and finish something you started instead of quietly abandoning it the way almost everyone around you quietly abandons everything. That is genuinely close to the full extent of what stands between you and being, relative to your peers, extraordinary. Not extraordinary compared to Agincourt. Extraordinary compared to the actual men currently around you, in your town, your school, your workplace, most of whom are not doing any of it. I'm not saying this to mock anyone, I am saying it because it is true, and because understanding it properly changes everything about how you should be thinking about your own 20s right now. I want to bring in 3 thinkers here because I think they explain, from 3 completely different angles, exactly why this specific moment, the gap between what men used to be capable of and what is now being asked of you, is actually the greatest opportunity you personally have ever been handed. Start with Nietzsche, and not the version of him you usually hear quoted on a gym wall. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he describes what he calls the three metamorphoses of the spirit, the specific stages a person moves through on the way to becoming who they actually are capable of being. First, you become the camel. The camel is the spirit that kneels down in the desert and asks to be loaded with the heaviest weight it can carry, because the camel understands, instinctively, that strength craves what is difficult. This is the stage almost nobody in the modern world chooses anymore. Most people spend their 20s actively avoiding weight rather than seeking it out. The camel does the opposite. It goes looking for the hardest available thing on purpose, because that is the only path to the next stage. Second, alone in the wilderness with everything it has been carrying, the camel becomes the lion. Nietzsche describes a great dragon the lion must fight, a dragon whose scales are covered in a single phrase, "Thou shalt." Every rule you inherited without choosing it, every expectation handed to you by people who never asked whether it actually served you, every voice telling you what you are allowed to want, that is the dragon. The lion's answer to the dragon is not obedience and it is not surrender, it is two words, "I will." The lion does not ask the dragon's permission, it fights for the right to choose its own direction, and it wins that fight through nothing but the accumulated strength it built as the camel. Third, only once that fight has actually been won, the lion becomes the child. Nietzsche calls the child innocence and forgetting, a new beginning, a self-propelled wheel. The child is not weak. The child is the only one of the three stages capable of genuine creation, because it is the only one that has already carried the weight and already won the fight, and can now build something entirely new from a place of real freedom rather than reaction. Camel, lion, child, carry the weight. Fight the dragon of what you were told you had to be. Build something nobody handed you the blueprint for. That is not a metaphor for ancient warriors. That is a description of exactly what is available to you right now, at your specific age, in your specific 20s, if you are willing to actually do the first stage that almost everyone around you has quietly opted out of. Now, Carl Jung, because he approaches the exact same idea from inside the human mind rather than from the outside world. Jung wrote about a concept he called the shadow, the part of yourself you would rather not look at, the fear, the doubt, the specific insecurity that keeps you from starting the thing you actually want to build. His argument was that the shadow does not go away if you ignore it. It just grows darker and denser the longer it stays unexamined. There is no coming to consciousness without pain, he wrote, and he meant it as a simple description of how growth actually works, not as something to be avoided. He used a specific image that I think about constantly. In myths, he wrote, the hero is the one who conquers the dragon, not the one who is devoured by it, and yet both have to deal with the same dragon. He is no hero who never met the dragon, or who, having once seen it, claims afterward to have seen nothing. Only the one who has risked the fight and was not overcome by it wins the treasure. That line matters because it tells you something almost nobody says plainly enough. Everyone meets the dragon, the doubt, the fear, the voice telling you that you are not the kind of person who does the hard thing. The difference between the man who becomes something and the man who does not is never whether he encountered that voice. Everyone encounters it. The difference is entirely whether he fought it or was quietly devoured by it while telling himself and everyone around him that there was no dragon there at all. Now, Alfred Adler, because he gives you the actual mechanism, the specific psychological engine underneath everything Nietzsche and Jung were describing in more poetic language. Adler broke from Freud specifically because he believed the central force in human psychology was not sex or trauma, but the drive to overcome a feeling of inferiority. To be human, he wrote, is to possess a feeling of inferiority which constantly presses toward its own conquest. And then the line that should genuinely reframe how you think about every disadvantage you currently feel. The greater the feeling of inferiority that has been experienced, the more powerful is the urge to conquest. Read that again, slowly, because it inverts almost everything you have probably been told about disadvantage. Adler is not saying disadvantage is irrelevant. He is saying it is fuel. The specific size of the thing you feel behind on, the specific weight of what you lack compared to other people, is not a ceiling on what you can become. In Adler's model, it is the raw material for exactly how far you are capable of going, provided you actually direct it forward instead of letting it curdle into resentment or excuses. Every man in history who built something extraordinary out of nothing was running Adler's exact mechanism, whether he had ever heard of Adler or not. The specific gap between where he started and where he wanted to be was the engine, not despite the gap. Now put all three of these together, because this is where it actually lands. You are living in a moment where the physical, historical bar, for what counts as remarkable, has fallen further than at almost any point in recorded history. 22% weaker grip strength in one generation is not a footnote. It is a measurement of exactly how far the baseline has dropped, which means the camel stage, carrying real weight when almost nobody around you is carrying any, has never required less to stand out from the pack. The lion stage, fighting the specific thou shalt that keeps telling you to stay comfortable, has never had a weaker dragon guarding the gate, because an entire generation has simply agreed not to fight it at all. And the child stage, building something genuinely new, has never had less genuine competition, because so few people ever make it through the first two stages to get there. Adler's mechanism means your specific disadvantage, whatever it is, the money you do not have, the house your parents could afford that you cannot, the career path that no longer exists in the form it used to, is not evidence that you are behind. It is the exact size of the engine available to you, if you actually use it rather than letting it sit there decaying into bitterness. I know this channel because I built it. History at War started because I loved history as a kid, and decided, with no experience and no guarantee it would work, to just start making videos about it. It became one of the largest channels of its kind on the platform, not because I had some unique advantage over everyone else who could have done the same thing, but because almost nobody else actually did it. Finn Harrington is a few months old as I am recording this, tens of thousands of views, real people in the comments engaging with real ideas. I started it because I wanted somewhere to actually think out loud about the things I was reading and noticing, and it grew because I kept showing up consistently, while most people who start something like this quietly stop within a few weeks. That is not a brag. That is the entire argument of this video demonstrated in one real example, from someone you are currently listening to. The bar was never as high as it felt from the outside. It just required actually walking up to it, which almost nobody does. Whatever the specific thing is that keeps tugging at you right now, the business idea, the channel, the skill you keep meaning to learn, the physical version of yourself you keep meaning to build, that is your camel stage sitting right in front of you. And the only thing separating you from it is whether you kneel down and ask to carry the weight or keep walking past it the way almost every man your age currently is. Your 20s specifically, not your 30s as some vague future safety net you tell yourself you will use eventually. Right now, this decade is the single highest leverage window you will ever have. You likely do not yet have the responsibilities that will rightfully consume your attention later, a mortgage, children, the specific obligations that come with building a family. What you have instead right now is time, and time in your 20s compounds in a way it simply does not later. Because whatever you build in the next several years becomes the foundation everything after it stands on. There is a flame in you right now. You know what it is, the specific pull towards something, the idea you keep coming back to at 2 a.m, the version of yourself you keep glimpsing and then talking yourself out of. That flame does not wait patiently for you to feel ready. It burns whether you use it or not. And if you do not direct it into something, it simply burns itself out, quietly, over years, until you are 40 and wondering where it went. The men of Agincourt did not wait until conditions were perfect. The teenagers of the Pals battalions did not wait until they felt fully prepared. The Vikings did not wait for a safer boat. They used what they had at the exact age you are right now, because that was simply what their moment required of them. Your moment requires less than theirs did physically. But it requires the same thing psychologically, the same willingness to kneel down like the camel, fight like the lion, and build like the child, instead of scrolling past the version of yourself you could actually become. The bar has never been lower, the competition has never been thinner, you have never had a better excuse to actually try. That flame you already feel is not decoration, it is the raw material of the camel stage sitting right in front of you, and there is more worth saying about exactly where you come from before this video closes. I want to talk directly to where you are actually from now, because the specific inheritance behind you matters, and I do not think enough people your age have ever been told properly what is actually in their own blood. If you are British, you come from an island that produced the longbowmen of Agincourt, that built the largest empire in human history from a country smaller than most American states, that stood alone against Nazi Germany in 1940, when every reasonable calculation said the war was already lost. Britain gave the world the Magna Carta, the scientific method through men like Newton, the Industrial Revolution that reshaped how every human being on Earth works and lives. Your ancestors built things that still stand 800 years later. The specific character required to do that, the willingness to endure genuinely brutal conditions and build something permanent anyway, is not a historical curiosity. It is the actual literal inheritance sitting in your genetics and your culture right now, mostly unused. If you are American, you come from people who crossed an ocean with almost nothing, in ships that killed a meaningful percentage of the people who boarded them, to build something from raw wilderness with no guarantee of survival. The specific men who signed the Declaration of Independence were, in the most literal legal sense, committing treason against the most powerful empire on Earth, and did it anyway because they believed the thing they were building was worth the risk of being hanged for it. The country that put a man on the moon less than 70 years after the first powered flight did that through the same specific national character, the willingness to attempt something absurd and simply refuse to accept that it could not be done. If you are Canadian, you come from people who took some of the harshest, most unforgiving land on the planet, land that regularly reaches temperatures that can kill an unprepared man in minutes, and built one of the most prosperous nations in the world out of it. Canadian troops at Vimy Ridge in 1917 took a position the French and British had both failed to take, through specific tactical innovation and sheer will, in conditions that killed thousands of them in a matter of days. That specific capacity, to look at conditions that should reasonably be considered unlivable and build a functioning, thriving civilization there anyway, is sitting in your inheritance whether you have ever thought about it or not. If you are German, you come from a people who, twice in one century, rebuilt entire shattered nations from literal rubble into some of the most productive, most technically sophisticated economies on Earth. The specific German capacity for disciplined, methodical rebuilding after total catastrophic collapse is one of the most remarkable national achievements in modern history, and it happened not once but twice, within living memory of people who are still alive today. If you are Australian, you come from convicts and settlers who were sent to the single harshest, most remote, most genuinely dangerous inhabited continent on Earth, and built modern cities out of it anyway. The men who fought at Gallipoli in 1915, thrown into an impossible tactical position by commanders who badly misjudged the terrain, held their ground with a specific, stubborn refusal to break that is still central to how Australians understand themselves as a people over a century later. None of that is nostalgia for its own sake. The point is specific and practical. Whatever nation you come from, the actual historical evidence says the people who built it were not soft, were not comfortable, and did not wait for ideal conditions before they acted. That capacity did not disappear from your genetics because the modern world got easier in some narrow material sense. It is still there. It is simply unused, sitting behind a wall of comfort and distraction that your ancestors, in almost every single case, did not have the luxury of hiding behind. Now, let me go back to Adler for a moment, because there is a specific extension of his idea that I think matters enormously for this exact point in your life. Adler observed something in his clinical work that most people miss entirely. The people who accomplish the most extraordinary things are very rarely the people who started with every advantage. They are, disproportionately, people who started with a specific, deeply felt sense of lack, and who directed the energy from that lack outward into building rather than inward into resentment. He called the negative version of this the inferiority complex, where a person becomes consumed by the feeling of lacking without ever converting it into forward motion. But the same starting material in a person who chooses to direct it differently becomes what he called the striving for superiority. Not superiority over other people in some cruel sense, but superiority over your own previous limitations. This matters directly for anyone listening to this who feels like they are starting from behind. The boomers hold 51% of all wealth in the West, while making up a fifth of the population. That is a real, documented structural disadvantage, and I'm not going to pretend it does not exist or that it does not matter. But Adler's argument, tested across an entire career of clinical observation, is that the size of a disadvantage correlates with the size of the striving it can produce, provided the person experiencing it actually chooses to direct it forward. The disadvantage is not erased by this, it is converted. That is the whole mechanism. Jung has something to add here too, because the shadow he describes is not only personal fear, it also includes the parts of the collective inheritance a generation has been taught to be ashamed of or embarrassed by. An entire generation of young men across the West has been taught, in various ways by various institutions, to view ambition itself with a kind of suspicion, to see the desire to build something significant as somehow arrogant or excessive rather than natural. That suspicion is itself a shadow, in Jung's specific sense, an unexamined inherited belief operating on you without your conscious consent. Confronting it, asking honestly whether ambition is actually something to be ashamed of or whether that belief was simply handed to you by people who benefited from you staying small, is exactly the kind of shadow work Jung spent his career describing. Nietzsche's lion had to fight a dragon covered in the words "thou shalt." One of the scales on that specific dragon, for a huge number of young men right now, is the quiet cultural instruction that wanting to be exceptional is somehow embarrassing, that ambition itself needs to be apologized for, that the correct posture is modest, comfortable, unremarkable. That is exactly the kind of inherited value the lion is supposed to fight, not out of arrogance, but because a value that keeps an entire generation smaller than it is capable of being was never actually earned. It was simply installed, and installed values, in Nietzsche's specific framework, are exactly the ones worth interrogating hardest. Because I do not want this video to be philosophy without application. The specific things separating you from the version of yourself available right now are almost never as large as they feel from the inside. Reading consistently, even 20 minutes a day, puts you ahead of the overwhelming majority of people your age within a year. Because most people simply do not do it, not because it is genuinely difficult. Training your body consistently, even without any special knowledge or expensive equipment, puts you in the physical top percentile of your generation within 18 months, specifically because the baseline, as that grip strength study showed, has fallen so far that consistency alone now counts as exceptional. Starting the specific project you have been putting off, even badly, even imperfectly, puts you ahead of every single person who is still only thinking about starting theirs, and that is nearly everyone. None of this requires talent in any special sense. Adler himself was dismissive of the very idea of innate talent as the primary driver of achievement. What it requires is the specific willingness to be the camel before you get to be the lion, to choose the weight rather than avoid it. At exactly the age you are right now, while the version of you that could do this is still available. The men who came before you in every single nation this video has named did not have the luxury of asking whether the moment was convenient. They built anyway. The specific gift available to you now that they did not have is that the bar has fallen so far that building anything at all consistently over even a modest period of time now separates you from almost everyone around you. That is not a small advantage. That is close to the largest advantage any generation has ever been handed, if you are actually willing to use it. I want to close on something specific about time itself, because I think it is the single piece most young men underestimate the value of. You will likely never again in your life have this specific combination of conditions, enough energy in your body to genuinely push it hard without lengthy recovery, enough time before the responsibilities of a family and a mortgage and aging parents begin consuming the hours you currently have available, enough runway ahead of you that a mistake made now costs you almost nothing in the long run, while a mistake made in your late 30s can cost you considerably more. Your 20s are not a rehearsal for the real thing that starts later. They are the actual highest leverage window you get, and the tragedy, the one this video is built around, is that most men spend that window exactly the way the grip strength study measured, quietly, gradually, growing weaker while telling themselves there is still plenty of time. There is not plenty of time. There is exactly the amount of time you have right now, which is more than you will have in 5 years, and considerably more than you will have in 10. That is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to focus you, the way Nietzsche's camel focuses itself by choosing to kneel down for the weight, rather than waiting for someone to hand it to it. And I think about the specific men from every nation this video has named, standing at Agincourt, at Vimy Ridge, at Gallipoli, in the trenches of the Somme, on long ships crossing open water with nothing but the stars, and I think about how young almost all of them actually were. Teenagers, men in their early 20s, not fully formed, not fully certain, not operating from some position of complete confidence. They simply moved forward anyway, at the exact stage of life you are at right now, because the moment they were born into required it of them. Your moment does not require the same thing of you in the same form. Nobody is asking you to walk into machine gun fire or cross an ocean in an open boat, but it is asking something, and the something it is asking is considerably smaller than what every single generation before yours was required to give, which means the men before you would very likely look at what stands between you and building something remarkable right now and consider it almost laughably small. 22% weaker grip strength in one generation is the measurement, but the deeper measurement, the one that actually matters, is not physical. It is the number of young men who have a genuine flame, a real pull towards something worth building, and who let it burn out quietly over a decade of scrolling, comfort, and telling themselves that someday, when conditions are better, they will finally begin. Conditions are not going to get better. They are, if anything, going to keep tightening in exactly the ways this channel has documented extensively. What will not tighten, what is entirely within your control, regardless of what happens to housing costs or wages or anything else discussed on this channel, is whether you personally choose to become the camel, then the lion, then the child, starting now with whatever specific flame you already feel and have been quietly ignoring. Jung said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." Adler said, "The size of your disadvantage is the size of your engine." Nietzsche said, "The spirit that kneels down and asks for the heaviest load is the spirit that ends up capable of creating something entirely new." None of them were writing about a golden age with ideal conditions. They were writing about exactly the kind of moment you are in right now. Uncertain, under-resourced, surrounded by people who have quietly given up trying. That is not a disadvantage in their framework. That is the entire raw material greatness has ever actually been built from in every single generation, including every single one of the historical examples this video has walked through. You are not behind. You are early in a field where almost nobody around you is actually trying. That is the whole message. That is the entire video. Use the flame. It genuinely will not wait for you.